Everybody, I take it that this is Mr. David Woodhouse.
Correct.
And are you an attorney at Mervyn Tabak, INC?
Sorry, Mr. Ntsebeza, I'm struggling to hear you. I just want somebody to perhaps have a look at my speaker here so that we can hear you properly.
Okay.
Give me just a minute. I'll get somebody to sort that out.
All right. Those are the joys of online communications.
They are, and I'm sorry, I'm not that competent when it comes to IT.
It says something about your age and mine.
Indeed, indeed. I can hear you. Thank you.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah, I think we can start. I don't know whether you have any objection to taking the oath, in which event then you will affirm. You have no objection to taking the oath?
I do.
Thank you. Are these your full names? David Woodhouse.
Correct.
Yeah. Then I'll swear you in before you testify. Mr. David Woodhouse, do you swear that the evidence that you are going to give before me is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? And if that is so, please raise your right hand for the camera and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you very much, Mr. Well, basically, you are going to be responding to the extent relevant to allegations that were made about or and against you by Mr. Ithi Mbalati and Mr. Lonwabo Tsotsobe. You are at liberty to deal with your evidence anyhow you wish to do so. I don't know if you have any written response to those two allegations.
Yes, I have submitted an affidavit.
Yes.
Oh, yes, he does have it. It's in that other file. I think it's upstairs.
Okay. Yes, no, I have been I've had the... Yes, yes. Yeah, Mr. Woodhouse, I have to my right, and it has nothing to do with her politics, Advocate Nele, who is my advisor, who will put one or two questions to you. And then to my left, I have from Vexmans, Mr. Sandile July, who is a legal resources that I have been afforded. But basically, you are very free to deal with your evidence, which you should ensure it does deal with some of the issues that were said about you or about whom you represent, and especially if you feel that they were said to your detriment. That is the fairest way we could, within the confines of our terms of reference and times, strictures of time, to afford an opportunity for those against whom allegations were made, an opportunity to be heard. The floor is yours, Mr. Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Ntsebeza. I don't actually propose going through my affidavit in full detail.
Yes.
But I do, in broad terms, want to refer to a few issues. And as I understand the allegations made against myself and obviously Tabak's, now Anderson's, they are essentially the following. We were party to a process which resulted in particular, Mr. Mbalati signing a settlement agreement in circumstances where he felt he was poorly advised and not given the advice. And allegations have been made against us that in somehow, and I mean they seem to be inferred and sometimes directly stated in the affidavits and in the transcript of the evidence before you by the said Mbalati, that we colluded with people like Andrew Bretsky of SACA and David Becker, who was one of the investigators. And I understand these individuals will be coming to give their own testimony before you.
Yes.
So let me perhaps put this all in context. My involvement in the so-called cricket match fixing issue started in early January 2016. And you don't need to look at the affidavit at this stage because it is all there. I was called by Bretsky, who gave me a brief background as to himself and why he was calling me. In essence, what he said to me was there were problems in relation to a match-fixing scandal, and he wanted to refer 3 cricketers to me. One of these cricketers was Mbalati. He then followed the call up with an email, and that email has been referred to at some length, as I understand it, by Mbalati, both here and on the radio. I then confirmed that of the 3 players, Mr. Tsotsobe was not one. In fact, I'm not sure how Mr. Tsotsobe got to even consider or concern himself with Anderson's or Tabak's, because he was not referred to me at all, or even mentioned to me. SACA, according to Bretsky, was going to pay for the advice and the assistance we were to give in the investigations being run by Cricket South Africa through David Becker. At the time I initially met with Mr. Mbalati and the other 2 cricketers, they had already consulted with Louis Cole. They had given him a statement, as I understand it, and that had all been recorded. The intention of that was for them to provide Cricket South Africa and the investigators with an affidavit. He and Becker were the lead investigators for Cricket South Africa, and they drafted an affidavit which they then forwarded to us. What then transpired over the period of January to July 2016 was that we attended to various consultations with Mr. Mbalati and his colleagues. We had various telephone conversations with him, and we attended an interview with Becker and Cole at the Protea Hotel Wanderers. By that time, Mr. Mbalati had signed his affidavit, and in that affidavit, he made certain statements and certain allegations regarding his involvement in the so-called match-fixing scandal. On the 15th of March 2016, we attended this interview with Becker and Cole. And the purpose of that interview, Mr. Ntsebeza, was for Mbalati to talk to his affidavit and assist with the investigation, as he had previously undertaken to do. The investigation was one which was mandated in terms of, as I understand it, the International Cricket Council codes. Players are bound by those codes, and this investigation was one such an investigation. The interview was part of a wider investigation into various alleged match-fixing sort of irregularities in the local T20 competition. And a number of players were being investigated. The three that I represented, and as I understand it, there were a number of other players that were investigated. And all of these investigations were, the source of those investigations was an affidavit which apparently was given to Mr. Becker and Cole by Ghulam Bodhi. Bodhi was ultimately prosecuted, and he too went through a similar process. In his affidavit, he purportedly made allegations about a number of players, including Mbalati. In the interview, it turned out that the evidence which Becker and Cole had appeared not to be consistent with what Mr. Mbalati had signed and put in his affidavit. And he later confirmed this with myself and a colleague when we met with him, to the extent that he stated to us that the version which the investigators put to him was 90% true. We then needed to assist him in trying to mitigate his obvious exposure to risk. And the the four of us in this room now will all appreciate the way these things are done. So one of the ways we did it was to have without prejudice discussions with Becker. And I had those, and my colleague at times had those. These discussions were for the purpose of trying to understand, particularly from my point of view, so that I could advise Mbalati on prospects, to get further information from them in terms of the facts they purportedly had and what sort of sanctions Mr. Mbalati could possibly be exposed to. So this took some time, and eventually, in I think approximately June, Becker sent me an email in terms of which he effectively set out a draft charge sheet. And if you look at the agreement that was ultimately signed by Mbalati, it contains what ultimately would have been the nature of the charges, but obviously there'd been some panel beating to that. We took and discussed this with Mr. Mbalati. He considered it, he took it away, as did he take away the draft settlement agreement when it was sent to us in July 2016. We discussed what his options were, and these options were discussed with him right from the start. What was going to happen, according to Cricket South Africa, was that they were going to charge these players in terms of the ICC codes. Well, actually, it was the ICC. They were going to have hearings, and the hearings would be chaired by Judge Bernard Ngwebe. And that would take place unless there was participation by the various cricketers in assisting with the investigations, or one could come to an agreement with them to avoid having to go through what would have been a publicly traumatizing and humiliating process, I think. In the end, prior to Mr. Mbalati signing that letter, he was advised by us of his rights and what he could do. He took the agreement away and he signed it. At the time, he had advised us that it was neither here nor there whether he was banned or suspended from cricketing involvement for whether 5 or 10 years, because he was at the end of his career. That was the background to all of this. Now I come to particularly the allegations that he makes about Tabax in terms of the way we provided advice to him. And in particular, if I might, then refer you, if you go to page 6 of my affidavit, where I deal with Mr. Mbalati's allegations. So, first let me say this. I have never met Andrew Bretsky. I have never met David Becker. Still, the only time I've met Becker was when I was at the interview with Mbalati and when I spoke to him over the phone. I couldn't tell you what Mr. Bretsky looked like. But whether I had coffee with Mr. Becker or not, I can't recall. The only time I was in Becker's company was when we were at the Protea, as I recall, and we were waiting for the investigation to start, or it was after it, during a break, I cannot remember, but there were tea and coffee, refreshments were made available for everybody. Now, when I deal with matters, I don't adopt a confrontational or aggressive stance. As I've found over my years of practice, as you've sort of pointed out, Mr. Ntsebeza, of my age, that it doesn't often help. It doesn't help our clients. So the fact that I may have had coffee with Mr. Becker or chatted to him is neither here nor there. It is what happens in the cut and thrust of litigation or matters, as we all know. We talk to our colleagues and we talk to our clients' opponents. The next thing that I want to deal with is that at no stage was I ever approached to act for Tsotsobi. He never contacted me, nor did Bretsky ever speak to me about Tsotsobi. So I cannot actually, for the life of me, understand why he refers to Tabax. Mr. Mbalati also makes allegations that, well, the advice he was given wasn't good, as I understand it, and he signed a settlement agreement in circumstances where he was not even aware of the charges. Well, that is not correct, because from the start, he was aware of what the ICC code said. He was aware of what was said to him at the interview in March by Becker and Cole about the possible ambit of charges. And he was aware in June when an email was sent to us by Becker of what they were looking at charging the Mr. Mbalati with. And ultimately, when we received the draft sanction agreement, there were charges in that. So he was aware of the ambit of what he faced and why he faced that. After that, Mr. Mbalati signed the agreement. He had, throughout this process, mandated us to negotiate on his behalf. He did not want to go through a disciplinary tribunal process, and he was at all times sensitive to negative publicity, to the extent that stage issue that the aspects were coming out in the media. We took that up with Becca, and said that we'd agreed throughout that what between us and could not be used elsewhere. He said to us that he had not disclosed this information. There's some mention made of the fact that, notwithstanding our discussions with Mr. Mbalati, he was still in contact with Gulam Bodhi.
Yes.
I'm just trying to catch up in my notes here.
No, it's all right. Take your time.
So, in essence, I dealt with, from pages 6 to 11, I've dealt with the allegations made by inter alia Mbalati and Tsotsobe about Tabax and the way we had dealt with them. And so in conclusion, Mr. Ntsebeza, I want to say that we at all times try to ensure that Mr. Mbalati was exposed as minimally as possible to a negative outcome. And it was in that context that we negotiated with Becca and Cole, or Becca, and discussed and finally concluded the sanction agreement on behalf, well, Mr. Mbalati concluded it and signed it.
Yes.
My affidavit speaks to all of that, and I confirm what is set out in that affidavit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodhouse.
Mr. Woodhouse, how are you?
How are you, Mr. July?
Okay, just one question. Was it an ICC code that they were charged again, or was it a Cricket South Africa Anti-Corruption Code?
It was the Cricket South Africa Anti-Corruption Code,
Yeah.
but it was taken, as I understand it, under the auspices of the ICC.
Okay. That was the only question from me.
Advocate Nine. Well, it may surprise you, Mister. I have no questions for you. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. You know, we have to tie these loose ends, and we have to relate them. And as you know, I mean, as a lawyer yourself, we can only act within the strictures of, or within the confines of our terms of reference. And our terms of reference basically seek to establish whether there has been an unfairness in this sporting code called cricket, and whether that unfairness was as a consequence of discrimination, which was unfair, based on race and gender. And of course, there are always some contexts within which one must consider that. And having considered the evidence that Mbalati gave, and having listened to you, it assists us to see in what way you are going to deal with the evidence of Mr. Mbalati and Mr. Tsotsobe to the extent that it was relevant to you and Tabax. So for you to have taken valuable time to come to us, to give your evidence under oath, is going to assist us in focusing on what our terms of reference say we should, and obviously your contribution both in the affidavit that you submitted as well in oral evidence will go quite a distance in elucidating matters. And thank you very much. We couldn't have done this.
So, if there's one thing I forgot to add, is that of the 3 cricketers that I was asked to help, one of them, when we put out the same proposal and we went through the same proposal process, he chose to go elsewhere for legal advice, which was his right. The other 2, including Mr. Mbalati, stayed with us, but I've dealt with that in the affidavit.
Yes, no, I saw that in your affidavit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Woodhouse. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You. And you too. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we budgeted a lot.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we budgeted more time than we are going to use. We are adjourned now till 1300 hours.